I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics, messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for February the 26th, 2026. Today on our Theology Roundup, we are continuing a series we started almost 3 weeks ago, approaching one law controversies, addressing the whole issue of one law or one Torah theology. And we should be finishing this up tomorrow. And then next week, we'll be getting into some related topics. I don't want to leave anyone hanging in terms of, well, I understand why you're disfavorable toward one law or one Torah theology, but what would be some other things we need to focus on as the Messianic community, which are far more positive and far more useful, especially as it involves non-Jewish believers embracing their faith heritage in Israel's scriptures. All right, so if you will, please turn with me to the Messianic Apologetics website. Click on the Articles tab and scroll down to the letter O. This is the last time we're going to do this. And here you see the article, Approaching One Law Controversies, Sorting Through the Legalism. Click there and a PDF file will open up. This is where we left off yesterday, the status of the one law or one Torah sub-movement. All right. Now, just to briefly recap, because I know that some people are actually just going to be joining us as we close up this series, which has been cumulative. My problem with one law, one Torah theology is mainly, number one, yes, there are various passages in the Torah, the Pentateuch, which speak of one law or one statute which apply to the native and sojourner in ancient Israel. But that one law was one law, lowercase l. It pertained to uniform, specific instruction, specifically in a place where the sojourner who had entered into the community could have been taken advantage of. So I believe that the one law passages have been misapplied by proponents of a one law, one Torah theology. And we went through those different passages and I explained myself. The second and far bigger problem is that the spiritual dynamics of one law, one Torah theology do tend to promote a great deal of legalism, judgmentalism, a condemnatory spirit, self-righteousness, pride, and there are far too many examples of people who have embraced one law theology who, rather than taking on various outward matters of Torah as they grow in faith, the dynamics of the new covenant, God supernaturally writing the law into the heart and mind, instead, they get very legalistic, very judgmental. In the scope of a few years, they start questioning the validity of the Apostle Paul, the validity of the apostolic writings, New Testament, and before long, they end up denying Yeshua. And one law theology can tend to be very impotent in preventing apostasy, especially since many of its most well-known proponents believe in a Calvinistic soteriology. You're either elect or you're not elect. So why would you try to really expel a lot of effort preventing apostasy? Obviously, they're not elect. And an alternative to one Torah, one law theology would instead propose that, all right, in these specific areas, one law, lowercase l, for native and sojourner, which would be specific legislation, not universal Torah per se. It was emphasizing commonality, not differences between native and sojourner. One law theology is wrong when it would stress that native and sojourner were nearly identical. Critics of one law, one Torah are wrong to overplay differences when in the body of Messiah we should be focusing on commonality native and sojourner had far more in common than not. In terms of when we are today, prophecies like Micah 4, 1-3, Isaiah 2, 2-4 stress that in the end times, the nations will come streaming to Zion to be taught from Moses' teaching. That is a reality on the ground in Messianic congregations and synagogues, every bit as much as Romans 9, 10, and 11 taking place. And if you don't see that, then you're blind. And we're going to be getting into some of those passages next week. Likewise, the new covenant, writing the instruction on the heart and the mind. And in the Torah itself, everyone within the broad community of Israel, native, sojourner, male, female, was to be educated in the principles of Moses' teaching and in how to observe the commandments. So no one was actively discouraged from keeping commandments. In today's Messianic community, we see a lot of non-Jewish believers who've been supernaturally intended by the Lord to come into this faith community, and rather than taking on a one Torah legalism, as they have grown in faith, have taken on things like Shabbat, the appointed times, a kosher style of diet. But the reason it's part of their maturation in faith is that it's also been enjoined with greater understandings of holiness, sanctification, God's grace, God's mercy, God's love, and the one thing which you will often never hear one law people talk about: co-laboring with Messianic Jewish believers in the salvation of the Jewish people and restoration of Israel. That is almost completely devoid of any kind of one law, one Torah ideology. So today, with that introduction out of the way, why would a ministry like ours, Outreach Israel Messianic Apologetics, a family like ours, which is non-Jewish, but we've been part of the Messianic community for 30 years now, we've gone through a lot of changes, why would we today in the year 2026 be negatively disposed to one law, one Torah theology? And of course, a lot of it has to do with all the changes which have taken place over the past 10 years, especially. I'd push it out, 12, 15 years. And we're going to go through some of those. And let it not be said that simply because you might not be favorable to the one law, one Torah sub-movement, you're telling non-Jewish believers in the Messianic community to leave and go get lost and go back to church. No. Messianic community right now needs as many allies and as friends as it can get. In the early 2000s, or 2000s, a prominent movement which broke off of Messianic Judaism became frequently known by the label of one law or one Torah. To its credit, it honestly sought an answer for the place of non-Jewish believers within the Commonwealth of Israel, Ephesians 2:11-13, as co-heirs with Jewish believers, Ephesians 3:6. It did stay away from much of the unnecessary lost tribes speculation and mythology promoted by the two-house sub-movement. It usefully decided that non-Jewish believers in the Messianic movement are like the sojourners, or gerim, who entered into ancient Israel, professing belief in Israel's God and entering into the community. Because sojourners, or gerim in ancient Israel, could be among those easily taken advantage of, the Torah included explicit instruction to the native Israelites that they were to be shown hospitality. The sojourner in ancient Israel was to actually be treated by the native born as though he were native born. When a stranger resides with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Leviticus 19:33-34, New American Standard. It was hardly unreasonable or unfair to suggest that non-Jewish believers in today's Messianic movement be shown the same welcome which sojourners in ancient Israel were to be demonstrated. Much of the one law or one Torah sub-movement's ideology is focused around a number of Torah passages which stress either one law or one statute to be followed by those within the community of ancient Israel, i.e., Exodus 12, 48 and 49, Leviticus 24, 22, Numbers 9, 14, 15, 15, and 16. A statement such as, "There shall be one standard for you. It shall be for the stranger as well as the native. For I am the Lord your God." Leviticus 24, 22 would be applied, New American Standard, would be applied by proponents of a one law, one Torah theology as a universal statement for all in the community of ancient Israel following the same basic Torah law. As passages which use terminology such as one law or one statute are examined for what they mean within Torah jurisprudence, are such remarks involving one law or one statute statements of universal Torah adherence, or principally statements regarding the legislation immediately detailed? This kind of attention to detail has not been frequently demonstrated by supporters of a one law or one Torah theology. And unfortunately, and I've stressed this throughout our study, way too many people have gotten their theology on this one from internet memes. They've seen one law for the native or the sojourner, and then they assume that what was being spoken of was universal basic Torah rather than specific legislation. That's one law, lowercase l, where the sojourner could have been taken advantage of and where it had to be stressed that there was to be uniform adherence in that particular area. And that is not a detail which many people in the one law, one Torah sub-movement like having pointed out to them. I mean, there's some very smart people who have promoted one law theology, but they have not done the level of exegesis or, they haven't done the level of examination that they should have. Okay. Leviticus 24:22, for example, is immediately preceded by how natives and sojourners, equally within ancient Israel, were to be stoned to death for blasphemy. Moreover, the one who blasphemes the name of the Lord shall surely be put to death. All the congregation shall certainly stone him. The alien as well as the native, when he blasphemes the name, shall be put to death. Leviticus 24:16, New American Standard. When an act of blasphemy was committed within ancient Israel by either a native or a sojourner, the uniform penalty of capital punishment was to be enacted. One standard. It was not as though a native born could be issued a corporal punishment such as a flogging or have to pay a heavy fine, with the sojourner only subject to capital punishment. In high legal matters where the native born of Israel might have been shown preferential treatment or special favors, there was to be a uniform standard. And indeed, how many of you have seen it quoted on an internet meme, one standard for the native or the sojourner, and often little to no consideration for original context? I mean, that is so much of where the whole one law, one Torah debate rises or falls. What is the context? What was the situation in ancient Israel where this instruction was originally delivered? You can't just cherry pick quotes. And look, we want to be fair. We know that there are cherry pick quotes by many in Messianic Judaism, certainly charismatic Christianity, even in evangelical Protestantism. So everyone has made the mistake of cherry picking quotes at some time or another in their life. The Torah's instruction includes a number of significant areas detailing the native-born Israelites as well as the sojourners' obedience and standing. Exodus 12:19, Leviticus 16:29, 17:15, 18:26, Numbers 35:15, Deuteronomy 1:16. But while sojourners were a part of the broad community or population of ancient Israel, it was hardly as though there were no differences of any kind between native Israelites and sojourners. Excuse me. Sojourners, unless being circumcised and intermarrying into one of the 12 tribes of Israel, did not have any sort of ancestral claim on the promised land. Likewise, due to their frequently low economic status, sojourners in ancient Israel were often recipients of welfare. Leviticus 19:10, 23:22, Deuteronomy 10:18, 14:21. While sojourners and natives in the community of ancient Israel had a great deal in common, there were also differences as well. Advocates of a one law, one Torah theology do not tend to be willing to acknowledge those differences. A significant problem many have had with advocates of a one law, one Torah theology has been how many of its strident proponents may insist that native and sojourner in ancient Israel had virtually no differences of any kind and were nearly 100% identical. That is the main problem people have had. Not non-Jewish believers as they have grown in faith, embracing things like Shabbat or Passover or something like that. It's you one law people think there were virtually no differences of any kind between native and sojourner in ancient Israel. And that is the kind of thinking which gives rise to supersessionism, replacement theology. I am no different in any way, shape, or form than a native-born Jewish person today. I mean, that's just non-sustainable. It really is. And believe me, we do need to focus on common elements first, common faith first, what we have in common first, before we focus on differences. But to act like there are no differences at all, that's just not good. While there are well-meaning and sincere advocates of a one law, one Torah theology who have made useful theological contributions in the past, there is a deep ideological problem with emphasizing Bible passages which use the terminology one law or one statute as a credo. Each one of these passages involves an original setting in ancient Israel, which has been directly affected by the death, burial, and resurrection of Yeshua the Messiah, and the post-resurrection era in which we now live. A frequent criticism of those who identify as one law, one Torah, is that they are very legalistic and rigid in their approach to Moses' teaching. This is hardly a surprise if one law originally involved settings such as uniform capital punishment for those in ancient Israel. Yeshua the Messiah, via his sacrifice on the tree, absorbed the capital penalties of the Torah onto himself. Colossians 2:14. Rather than emphasize passages which employ one law terminology, it is far better for teachers and leaders to stress education and training in Moses' teaching for the Jewish and non-Jewish believers who make up today's Messianic movement. As it was witnessed for the broad community of ancient Israel, and I've already referenced this, assemble the people, the men and the women and the children and the alien who is in your town, so that they may hear and learn and fear the Lord your God, and be careful to observe all the words of this law. Deuteronomy 31:12, New American Standard. An educational model of receiving Torah instruction will facilitate the work of the Holy Spirit via the power of the new covenant, which is to supernaturally transcribe God's commandments onto a redeemed heart and mind. Jeremiah 31:31 to 34, Ezekiel 36:25 to 27. A redeemed heart and mind are not rigid and inflexible when it comes to implementing God's instruction in complicated 21st century circumstances, and in a still developing and maturing Messianic movement. with a primary mission of facilitating Jewish outreach and evangelism. So let's get into this now. What might our relationship be to the one law or one Torah sub-movement now in the 2020s? In 2013, so do the math, that's 13 years ago, our ministry made the following observations. The one law, one Torah sub-movement, while rightly emphasizing that God's Torah should be heeded by all of his people, is going to have to decisively recognize some post-resurrection era realities and changes which have been directly affected by Yeshua's sacrificial work, and recognize much of the judgmental legalism it has been responsible for promoting. Each one of us who composes the broad Messianic sphere of influence has implemented various modifications and changes to our theology within the past decade. And this was originally written in 2023. A few modifications have been made before we had the study, but yeah, the past decade, 2013, 2023. So that puts it a few years after the whole COVID lockdown and what God was trying to communicate to us by that. And we have not only been required to adapt to new information and situations, but we have also had various experiences and encounters which have caused these changes to be implemented. New information and situations affect a ministry like Outreach Israel and Messianic Apologetics, as well as they affect proponents and supporters of a one law or one Torah theology. Suffice it to say, our observations in 2013 for the one law, one Torah sub-movement needing to moderate in various ways have not at all been met with satisfaction. And look, in the past 10 to 13 years, all of us on our theological, spiritual journey have made modifications, adjustments, recalibrations here and there to our theology. It affects Outreach Israel Ministries, Messianic Apologetics, and it affects people who support a one law, one Torah theology. Everyone has made some kind of changes or adjustments to their beliefs and theology because of new information, new perspectives, as well as experiences. Okay? Let's just be honest about that. And in our ministry's case, we were hoping 10, 13 years ago to see those in the one law, one Torah sub-movement moderate their legalism, moderate their judgmentalism, move from the far right to the immediate right of center. And of course, they didn't do that. They did not make changes to our satisfaction. Because our preference has always been to focus on commonality first and not differences, our ministry has not readily discussed or emphasized a number of our problems with a one law, one Torah theology. Many of the people who follow Outreach Israel and Messianic Apologetics also follow various teachers who strongly identify as one law, one Torah. It would have been our hope that many would simply have been able to pick up on some of the noticeable differences without us having to really say anything, as we do recognize how there is far too much unnecessary division and rivalry in the body of Messiah. Now, our ministry has actually had very uneasy, strained, and difficult relations with one law, one Torah for over a decade, 2010 to the present. So this would now be over a decade and a half. This is in no small part due to what we would consider some of the fundamentalist theological tendencies of one law, one Torah. On a number of theological issues, it is not difficult to detect how Outreach Israel Ministries and Messianic Apologetics have actually sat to the hard left of various one law, one Torah advocates. Much of this is due to what we consider to be some of their inflexible and rigid approaches to Torah application in the modern world, which we have witnessed over many years. One law, one Torah, rather than being seen to properly confront and troubleshoot legalism, instead may seem to, at least indirectly, encourage legalism and a judgmental spirit. What are a number of the noticeable theological differences with one law, one Torah, which we have actually had for many years, which some following our ministry may have missed? While we teach that natives and sojourners in ancient Israel had more in common than not, we do not teach that natives and sojourners in ancient Israel were virtually identical. There were indeed various differences between the two groups. We do teach that today's Jewish people have a different relationship to God's Torah than non-Jewish people, if for any other reason that the Torah composes the ethnic and cultural heritage of today's Jewish people and believers in Yeshua the Messiah. Non-Jewish believers in Yeshua the Messiah can only partake of the Torah as their spiritual heritage. 1 Corinthians 10:1, as they do have a heritage from their own native cultures, which also affects their identity. We teach that only native ethnic Israelites had a responsibility to circumcise their infant males on the 8th day, Leviticus 12:1 and 2, whereas the issue regarding circumcision of the sojourner in ancient Israel was most likely to be prompted by their handling of the Passover, Exodus 12:48. Okay, and if you need to, go to the Messianic Apologetics website, look at the frequently asked question entry on circumcision. That'll deal with what non-Jews today might do with it. We do have a high view of circumcision as a medical procedure. We do not teach that the only difference between native Israelites and sojourners in ancient Israel is that the former had or has some sort of temporal land rights this side of the second coming. The inheritance of sojourners depicted in the future millennial kingdom, Ezekiel 47:22 and 23, is not universal to all followers of Israel's God or believers in Israel's Messiah, but is restricted. Okay, we also have a frequently asked question on that. We do recognize how, among various differences between native and sojourner in ancient Israel, sojourners could eat animals which died of natural causes, Deuteronomy 14:21, likely as an ancient form of welfare. And why would that be the case? Because sojourners were frequently poor and almost destitute. Various other significant differences with one law or one Torah exist, such as evaluating the intentions of Acts 15:21 and the actual success rate of implementing the apostolic decree as witnessed in Acts and the Pauline letters. Also, the viability of capital punishment in the post-resurrection era and intentions of Colossians 2:14. Now, there are, of course, other differences which I would have with some one law, one Torah people, but some of these things could also apply to different leaders, rabbis in parts of the Messianic Jewish movement as well. So we don't need to go into those today. It is witnessed in the Torah that while the native Israelite and sojourner were not exactly the same, there were certainly many areas of commonality. The sojourner who entered into the community of ancient Israel was actually anticipated to keep a considerable bulk of the Torah's commandments. A variety of Torah instructions where the ger or sojourner was specifically enjoined to Torah adherence, notably include, so let's go through this list. Sabbath rest, Exodus 20, verse 10, 23:12, Deuteronomy 5:14. A fair trial, Deuteronomy 1:16. Access to cities of refuge, Numbers 35:11, also Joshua 20, verse 9. Participation in the festival of Sukkot or tabernacles and the festival of Shavuot or weeks, Deuteronomy 16:11 and 14. Observance of the Day of Atonement or Yom Kippur, Leviticus 16:29. Some expectation to observe the Passover, Exodus 12:49, Numbers 9:14. Okay, I need to check something on the computer. Okay. All right, let's get back to this. All right. Okay. Observance of the festival of unleavened bread, Exodus 12:49. Observance of sacrificial procedures, Leviticus 17:8, 22:18, Numbers 15:14 and 16. Atonement for unintentional and intentional sin, Numbers 15:16 to 31. Purification rites after eating unclean meat, Leviticus 17:15. Prohibition on offering sacrifices to Molech, Leviticus 20, verse 2. Penalties for blaspheming the name of the Lord, Leviticus 24:16. Adherence to sexual and moral purity, Leviticus 18:26. Observance of the law of damages, or lex talionis, Leviticus 24:20 to 22. The option of being circumcised to keep the Passover and consequently being regarded as a native, Exodus 12:43 to 47. So, look, those are a lot of areas. Of course, you can go in and look at them yourself. I had to check, making sure I got something proper, got something right. But the main thing is that, sojourners were welcome in the community of ancient Israel. There were a lot of significant areas of Torah adherence that they were anticipated to participate in. An institution, for example, like the seventh-day Sabbath, it was inclusive, not exclusive. And today's Messianic Jewish community should not be turning people away, potential friends and allies and co-laborers in the salvation of Israel and the Jewish people, because they came into the congregation or the synagogue because they thought that there was something important about the festivals of Israel. They're not trying to come in and replace the Jewish people. They're trying to come in as fellow brothers and sisters. And indeed, there are many Messianic Jewish congregations and assemblies which recognize that. There are others which do not. While the stress of one law, one Torah has been to approach the presence of non-Jewish believers in today's Messianic community as though they were gerim or sojourners, one inconvenient reality has to be recognized. Non-Jewish believers in today's Messianic movement are not the gerim present in the community of ancient Israel. For that same matter, today's Jewish believers in Yeshua, while the descendants of the native Israelites at Mount Sinai, are not the people who stood at Mount Sinai. None of us today are the direct recipients of the Torah's commandments. How much theological navigating and negotiation needs to take place in future studies and examinations regarding reading the Torah for its original audience first, and then deducing principles and application for today, as well as considering factors like the work of the Messiah on the tree, etc. Many of the Torah studies witnessed in the Messianic movement just assume that the Torah was written directly to 21st century people, when it was not. While the Torah is relevant as God's word and its commandments are holy, Romans 7:12, understanding its instruction much better for the community of ancient Israel within the ancient Near East first is something all Messianic people will need to be committed to doing better. And indeed, while this study on approaching one law controversies has tried to focus in on, okay, what do these statements, one law, one statute mean in their original context, mainly in terms of specific legislation being issued. Likewise, what's the one thing some of you all have heard? What this legislation meant for native and sojourner in what community? The community of ancient Israel. Okay? That tries to place the Torah, the Pentateuch, in some kind of a 13th or 15th century BCE setting. You don't often hear that within today's Messianic Jewish community. Many people assume falsely that the Torah was written directly to them. They often never try to consider it the way they should in some kind of an ancient 15th or 13th century BCE context. And of course, that depends on how you date the Exodus. It is useful for Bible readers to keep in mind that the Gerim or sojourners in ancient Israel were to be following a considerable amount of Moses' teaching, and perhaps that their daily overall adherence to commandments was not too different from native Israelites. This can be used to support the premise that the modern Messianic movement should be welcoming to non-Jewish believers in its midst. Leviticus 19:34, and not be harshly restrictive on those who have been prompted by the Lord to keep various aspects of God's Torah, which historical Christianity has widely dismissed, i.e., the seventh-day Sabbath, Shabbat, appointed times, dietary laws. Yet, the modern Messianic Jewish movement has also tended to properly stress that non-Jewish believers need to be specially called by the Lord into this faith community. They need to be specially summoned by him. While it will frequently involve them first connecting to their faith heritage in the scriptures of Israel, Ephesians 2:12, 3:6, it must also involve them participating as co-laborers with their fellow Jewish believers in matters of Jewish outreach and evangelism. It is easily witnessed how such a messianic mission of Jewish outreach and evangelism is quantitatively absent from the spiritual and theological praxis of most identifying with a one law or one Torah theology, especially if that one law, one Torah theology is saturated with a Calvinism where God has predestined some to salvation and some to damnation. So he knows. And why do we really need to be involved in evangelism? Throughout most of our ministry history, Outreach Israel and Messianic Apologetics have stressed that matters of Torah are to be steadfastly focused on the prompting of the Holy Spirit via the sanctification of the individual, via the supernatural compulsion promised in the New Covenant, Jeremiah 31, 31 to 34, Ezekiel 36, 25 to 27, Hebrews 8, 8 through 12. It will first manifest itself in a much better and more concentrated manifestation of love for God and neighbor. Deuteronomy 6:5, Leviticus 19:18, also Matthew 19:19, 22:39, Mark 12:31, Luke 10:27, Romans 13:9, Galatians 5:14, James 2:8. Unfortunately, many who stridently identify as one law, one Torah, do not often demonstrate a great demeanor of love or compassion, but instead they do demonstrate a great deal of religious pride and judgmentalism. And indeed, how many people who were once involved in one law, one Torah studies, groups, they followed the teachings of a particular person or what have you, and then they end up leaving and going back to church. Was the main reason they left because, I'm resting on the seventh day, or I'm not eating certain things? Or was it instead legalism, judgmentalism, pride, inflexibility? And why would I want to be involved with these people who really are not demonstrating that much love or compassion to others? I mean, we've got huge numbers of stories I could pull where people said, look, I went through a season, Torah study was great, connecting to the Old Testament was great, even the Sabbath was great, but I got involved in some group and it just got very legalistic, very judgmental, and I had to find myself go back to church. Even in my own local Messianic Jewish congregation, the issue with one law, one Torah theology has not been non-Jewish believers partaking of the blessings of Shabbat or the festivals or a kosher style diet, weekly Torah study. It's always been on the legalism and the judgmentalism and the self-righteousness, always. So what is off with one law, one Torah theology if it promotes more legalism and judgmentalism and self-righteousness than growth in love, holiness, sanctification, and mercy, among other fruits of the Spirit? Over the past decade, since our ministry relocated from Central Florida to North Texas, so 2012 to 2013 when this section was originally written, now it's 2026, obviously, so we've been back out here for 13 years. Those who have been paying attention to our activities should have been able to easily see how we have not been working in association with one law, one Torah advocates. The last time I did anything was I went on a podcast almost 5 years ago, and that was during COVID. So that's what we did during COVID. Instead, our ministry and family have been reintegrated into the Messianic Jewish community at both local and national levels. So, my stepfather, Mark Huey, for example, he is an elder at Etz Chaim Messianic Jewish Congregation. I've been ordained as a Messianic teacher by the International Alliance of Messianic Congregations and Synagogues. That took place in 2022. Also, my stepfather, Mark Huey, is a fundraiser with the Joseph Project and outreach of the MJAA. They gather aid for Israel. Okay, so we're fully in the Messianic Jewish community. We're back where we started, back in 1995, 1996. Within the next decade, although we're not down to that many left, by the way, we do know that a number of our older ministry publications and materials will need to be updated, reflecting a number of the significant experiences which we have had. Doors have been opened to us by the Lord, which have remained closed to others. And just to give you a ballpark number, we only have, like, in terms of our ongoing updating process of our publications, we've got, like, I think maybe 8 or 9 left to really go through, and the bulk of them will be finished by the end of the year. Should be finished. It was indeed our sincere hope and prayer to have seen many strident proponents of one law, one Torah moderate in the 2010s and early 2020s. But present circumstances in 2023 and 2026 require us to be more public about our negative inclinations toward one law, one Torah. As previously noted, during the past decade, each one of us has had new experiences and encounters. As our ministry and family have been welcomed within the Messianic Jewish community, some of the well-known proponents of one law, one Torah have become negatively inclined toward a great deal of extra-biblical Jewish literature, like the Mishnah and Talmud, as mainly being unreliable lore, and the place of various mainline Jewish traditions. While Outreach Israel and Messianic Apologetics have become more active in the Messianic Jewish mission involving evangelism and support for the state of Israel, much of the one law, one Torah sub-movement has been caught in a state of flux regarding its own future and successors. This is a future probably now tied up with the emergence of pro-Namian Christianity and the questions which pro-Namianism will have to wrestle with regarding Judaism, Jewish tradition, Israel, Zionism, and Messianic Judaism. Okay, we know that a lot of that is in flux right now. And some of it, you've seen the pendulum swing from, a lot of Jewish tradition, a lot of Jewish custom is not needed, not really wanted. You see some swinging back to Jewish tradition, Jewish custom. I have a word for that. It's called instability. Okay, that's not to say that there aren't people in Messianic Judaism who are unstable either. But when you go, to this and then you go to that, that's called instability, inconsistent. Okay. We know that there's an uncertain future. And along with that, some of you all have heard talk, rumors about a possible one law, one Torah denomination being formed. Well, who is that going to involve? It's going to involve a lot of people who once were or may still be identifying with a label like Hebrew roots. It's going to have a lot of people who are rigidly fundamentalist, probably quite patriarchal, even people who clip the edges of Christian nationalism and believe that things like the 18th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote, need to be repealed. So there is no way in heaven or hell I would ever be involved with a one law, one Torah denomination. I'm sorry to say that. Over the past several years, it is also to be witnessed. Now, we're going to get into something else here. From a few within the Messianic Jewish community, various fluctuating definitions of what one law or one Torah actually is. Okay. Does being labeled as supportive of a one law, one Torah theology apply to one's interpretation of various Pentateuchal passages, i.e., Exodus 12, 48 and 49, Leviticus 24, 22, Numbers 9, 14, 15, 15, and 16, and whether they speak of a universal Torah observance or not? Does being labeled as one law, one Torah concern a theology which stresses that non-Jewish believers should be encouraged to partake of things like the Sabbath, appointed times, or kosher? Does it concern an opinion that non-Jewish believers may wish to consider the importance of these things as they grow in holiness? Could being labeled pejoratively as one law, one Torah be applied to any non-Jewish believer who has a high view of Torah practices, such as Shabbat, the Moedim, or kosher, as worthwhile matters for sincere believers to consider? The goalposts, as it were, keep getting moved, and could even be applied to many Messianic Jewish believers who consider various Torah practices as worthwhile for non-Jewish believers to partake of as they are called to participate in the Messianic community. And a lot of this actually goes back to, you can see the footnote here, an article which was released in 2021, One New Man, Hebrew Roots, Replacement Theology, by Dr. David Rudolph, who is the director of the Messianic Jewish Studies program at the King's University. And I'd like to briefly mention some of this. Here is my copy from my archives of that article. This is how it appeared in the Kesher Journal a little later in 2022, but it was originally released in 2021. And of course, why do I need to mention this? Because I am mentioned in this paper. And I'd like to clarify a few things if some of you all were concerned. Okay, so in this actual paper, you all can, go look this up online. It's almost 5 years old now. There is a chart. Let me see. Okay. Yeah, there's a chart here, a table where he has the categories of hard one law, soft one law, and then what he concludes from the Jerusalem Council. And of course, Dr. Rudolph, he's free to have his opinion. But mainly, it's the soft one law position, which many non-Jewish believers in the sphere of influence of the Messianic community would be accused of having. That it is God's ideal for Gentile believers to keep the biblical festivals. God desires Gentile believers to keep the biblical festivals. Gentile believers ought to keep the biblical festivals. His view and the position of many Messianic Jews is Gentile believers are allowed to keep the biblical festivals. Gentile believers are free to keep the biblical festivals. Gentile believers may keep the biblical festivals. So, he's decided, that if you think that it's God's ideal for all of God's people to keep the festivals, you're soft one law. Actually, I think that there are many Messianic people out there who they wouldn't adhere to any of these real categories. Instead, they would think that the biblical festivals, Shabbat, kosher, partaking of various outward elements of Torah would be important to consider as a person grows in holiness and grows in the new covenant. And God prompts people. And then, while he may direct a family like ours into the Messianic community, it won't just stop at things like Shabbat or the appointed times. It will also be joining as co-laborers in the Messianic mission. So by his standard, we might adhere to a one law super soft, but the goalposts keep getting moved. And That's not right. I would even say it's not ethical. Now, this paper, just to clarify some things, it does include some old quotations from things I wrote over 10 years ago. Okay. And when this paper was actually released in 2021, some of those things were in the process of being revised. In particular, the article on one law, one Torah theology, the article I've got is circumcision for everyone, the frequently asked question entry on circumcision. And very soon after this thing was released, I had to go and make sure that we, if necessary, clarified some old perspectives we adhered to. Okay. And we did that, and we're moving on because obviously the IMCS, which I am ordained with, would not consider me one law, one Torah. Otherwise, they would never have ordained me. But I need to mention something which took place in 2015 because, David Rudolph, he's in charge of the Messianic Jewish Studies program, the King's University. He lives in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, just as we do. And when he actually came, when he moved out here in 2015, he visited my local congregation. And as we were introduced to him, he communicated to our family that he did not believe that we had any business being in the Messianic Jewish movement, much less in any kind of Messianic ministry. And while that is something we can forgive, our family can forgive that, it is not something we can excuse, and you do not get, on the basis of the ideology and value system of the McKee family, you do not get any chance to make that up, okay? Because when you are told by someone or communicated by someone, we really don't want you here, I mean, that is a failure to observe the first and second greatest commandments: love God and love neighbor. And many people we know have had that kind of an encounter with Dr. Rudolph. And there have been people at my own local congregation who have applied to join or be a part of the Jewish Studies program at King's University who have been rejected from it. So look, everyone has their experiences. We forgive Dr. Rudolph, but these things are in here, and yes, I can correct them. I can clarify things, but I can't do anything about it because from very early on, he communicated to our family we should not be involved in the Messianic movement, and we should certainly not be involved in any kind of Messianic ministry. He's forgiven, but you're not going to get any more chance of dialogue, any more chance of trying to make it quote unquote right. Because for somebody who wants to play on well, we need to know our differences and distinctions, guess what? You want to have some differences and distinctions? Let's talk about the value system of the McKee family. We come from an evangelical Protestant, egalitarian, Scottish American background. We're welcoming. We believe that everyone has important gifts, talents, and skills to communicate to contribute to the community. But the moment you start saying that you're not welcome, go get lost, fine. Have what you want. We'll give you what you want. But you forfeit all future opportunities for dialogue or any kind of making it right. It's now between you and the God you serve. So, look, all of us have had negative exchanges, not only with one law, one Torah, but with hard shell bilateral ecclesiology people. And, we wish him well. We wish the Jewish Studies program at King's University well, especially given the challenges of it being part of the Gateway enterprise. But yeah, that's life. Okay. All right, let's get back to this now. Overall, however, it is seen that the Messianic Jewish movement stresses that non-Jewish believers have to be specially called into this faith community in a manner similar to Ruth joining with Naomi. Ruth 1, 16 and 17. Our ministry absolutely affirms how non-Jewish believers have to be specially called by the Lord into the Messianic movement. Certainly, while we would like to see many more families from evangelical Protestant backgrounds like ours partake of the Messianic lifestyle as we have, it is all contingent on the plan of God and prompting of the Holy Spirit for them. And the timetable of the Holy Spirit is not our timetable. If non-Jewish believers are being truly called of the Lord to partake of their faith heritage in Israel's scriptures and various outward matters of Torah, it must also lead them serving as co-laborers with Jewish believers in matters of Jewish outreach and evangelism, something fully consistent with the Apostle Paul's message of Romans 9 through 11. We believe it is far better and more spiritually viable for non-Jewish believers not called into the Messianic movement to find a conservative evangelical church which has a high view of the Old Testament's moral principles and supports Israel and the Jewish people than to be a part of some of the independent one law, one Torah groups which are likely to be legalistic and stifling of the spirit and may even support various forms of replacement theology. We know that our experiences with one law, one Torah proponents may have been different from some of your experiences. It is safe to say that in the future, you will be seeing Outreach Israel Ministries and Messianic Apologetics and one law, one Torah moving further and further apart. Yet, we will always continue to do our best to focus on the commonality we have with all of those who claim Yeshua as Lord first, before we discuss any spiritual or theological differences. We are sensitive to how many who identify or self-label as one law, one Torah do follow our ministry and teachings. We would encourage today's non-Jewish believers who would identify as being Torah observant to begin most especially to ask themselves how they can better participate in the Messianic Jewish mission of Jewish outreach, evangelism, and Israel solidarity. And that is especially peaked, of course, in our post-October the 7th, 2023 world. So, yeah. Tomorrow, as we continue in this series, and yeah, there are some difficult things I had to say today, but I'm glad I got it off of my chest. I got it out of my system. Tomorrow, as we close this up, we're going to be discussing there has to be a better way. Mainly the way of the Holy Spirit, where one can learn some of the mistakes made by one law, one Torah theology. And then as we look forward next week, as we'll be getting into prophecies, the nation streaming to Zion to be taught from Moses' teaching, the kinds of very important things which are caught up in, the important verse of Acts 15, which nobody pays attention to, the words of the prophets agree. What are things which the prophets of Israel have anticipated, which might actually be taking place in our midst today? Not just in terms of Romans 9, 10, and 11, but the non-Jewish believers in our midst. And I know that that is very scary to a lot of people. And the reason it's scary to a lot of people is because what if we are in the end times? Well, we've got a lot of things happening right now, which we need to be paying attention to. We don't need to be presumptuous, but we do need to be on guard and alert. So let's move now over to our news roundup. We do the news roundup after the theology roundup because the news is, of course, time sensitive and it changes from day to day. And we know right now that there's some really big things going on. Before we went live, I saw that the talks between the United States and Iran are continuing in Geneva. There claimed to be some progress made. Of course, we'll see what the next week brings. I know that within the next day, we'll learn some more about that. Yet, when you watch the news, the momentum is not toward, there's going to be this, last minute miracle diplomatic solution between the United States and Iran. No, the momentum is preparing people for some kind of military conflict. So it will be interesting to see what happens. Of course, we've got Purim coming up very, very soon. And if anything, that just gets people thinking about, well, Purim took place in ancient Persia. Our attention right now is focused on the Islamic Republic of Iran, what Israel's going to do, what the United States is going to do. There's no requirement that a war begin or end around the holiday of Purim. So it'd be interesting, but it's not required. The 12-day war, which occurred last year, did not occur in conjunction with any biblical appointed times. It did take place 3.5 weeks before the Messiah conference, but we know that things are changing very rapidly. Different military assets are being moved into position, and we've got to pay attention. There's no question about that. So, number one, be praying for peace, Israel, Gaza, the Middle East, the Iranian situation. Number two, peace, Russia and Ukraine. And number three, reason and sanity to prevail here on the American home front. So, okay. All the stories I'm about to go through, these will be listed for you to look at later today when this episode is archived at MessianicApologetics.net. Our first story, and this came across my social media feed yesterday on Instagram. This is obviously from a Christian channel. What happens to the world if, quote unquote, aliens are disclosed? Yeah, this is a live wire question that, of course, right now we know that the president has signed an executive order. It's been acknowledged by the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. There's got to be a release of different documents, different materials on extraterrestrials, UFOs, etc. How is this going to affect people of faith? So a lot of people are going to be answering that. This is of course, one, immediate worldwide effects, global shock and awe, fear, fascination, identity crisis for millions, we are not alone narrative. Everything has changed. Authority crisis, the real shift wouldn't be aliens, it would be authority. Mainly, what do you do about all these people in the government, military, media, and even religious leaders, pastors, rabbis, etc. The view is here. Number three, Christianity would polarize. Some would say Jesus was an alien. God is outdated. Religion must evolve. Others, the Bible already warned about this. This is spiritual deception. So that would be tied into Nephilim. Number four, a new global belief system begins forming. So while I think a lot of people would anticipate atheism to rise, instead it would be, old religions divide us, humanity unite. We're evolving beyond primitive faith. These beings are guiding our development, tied into things like New Age spirituality and even global governance. So, number five, they conclude moral confusion accelerates. 6, why this fits biblical end times warnings. This is a very useful thing. If main conclusion, nominal Christianity will collapse, biblical Christianity will sharpen. So, look, if there is, and again, we're speaking hypothetically, but these are things which a lot of believers are talking about. So we're cataloging it. They're going to be people, if there is alien UFO disclosure, they're going to conclude that Jesus was an alien. Okay, I'm just going to tell you that right now. And what appear to be miracles, quote unquote, well, just from a highly advanced alien species, how do we know he's not just, affecting certain healing energies or frequencies to one's, problem? And he was crucified, put to death, but he didn't really die. He just went into some kind of hibernation and then came back, right? Because his species has got the ability to heal itself, right? That is something which people will be processing. Others are going to be like, this is deception. This is from the devil, and tie things into the Nephilim of Genesis 6, fallen angels, human females, etc. Aliens, UFOs are just a modern manifestation of that. Others might find some kind of midway. Well, no, I believe Yeshua, Jesus, was the actual Son of God, manifest in human form. But how do we know that the conflict between good and evil is constrained to this planet known as Earth? Pending more information, let's investigate this more, because the cosmic conflict on Earth is wrapping up, the conflict on Earth between good and evil is wrapping up the cosmic conflict between good and evil. There are all kinds of ways people are going to respond to this, and we don't need to be ignorant of them. because one of the things which I think is so important about this news roundup is we don't need to wait for some drama or point event to then find out, oh, I got to get ready. I got to go through the quick, get caught up, course on that. No, don't wait for the cliff notes. Don't wait for some drama. Get familiar with some of these things now before there's some kind of dramatic point event. Hey, nothing could happen with UFO alien disclosure as far as we know. From open source intel yesterday, the 25th of February, and there's a 32-second clip. Zelensky, Russia couldn't and can't occupy us. They didn't win, and for us, it's a victory. You look at the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and you wonder, for a country with as advanced a military and advanced military hardware as Russia has, why is it only advanced so far into Ukraine? Now, it has kind of ended up in a trench, World War I style warfare. The battle lines are not moving that far. Some of that is because Ukraine has been buttressed by the West sending it military aid, financial aid. But this is a conflict which does need to come to an end. And we need to be praying for some kind of an honorable peace, because the real losers are, the Russians, the Ukrainians. I know President Trump in a speech the other night said that Russia's losing 25,000 soldiers a month to this conflict. Look, whether you like Russia or not, that's a human tragedy, and that does need to stop. We need to pray for peace, Russia, Ukraine. All right. From open source intel, this is from yesterday, 4:55 p.m., and there's a 45-second clip. U.S. President J.D. Vance on Iran. So this is from the vice president. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. If they try to rebuild the nuclear weapon, that causes problems for us. In fact, we've seen evidence that they have tried to do exactly that. Okay. So right now, we know that the president, the administration is going to try to see some kind of a diplomatic solution sought with Iran. We'll find out in the coming days what's going to happen next per the recent meetings in Geneva. At the same time, the momentum is we can't let Iran get a nuclear weapon. The momentum is preparing people for some kind of military action, some kind of military conflict. So many of you all follow 2C TV. His comment yesterday afternoon was hours away from the final talks between America and Iran. It does look like there's going to be some more talks, but mainly Vice President Vance, we have seen evidence that the Islamic Republic are trying to rebuild their nuclear weapons. Secretary of State Rubio, Islamic Republic not wanting to discuss ballistic missiles is a big mistake. Now, this is as of yesterday, 5/22. So we don't have all the information yet, what came out of the meeting in Geneva. Here's a story that was forwarded on to me from the Times of Israel. This is yesterday, 8:31. The headline, U.S. said to begin moving another 6 F-22 stealth fighters toward the Middle East. Any of you all know about the F-22? These aircraft are mainly employed in, they're not bombers, they're mainly employed to air superiority fighter built for unmatched speed, maneuverability, and stealth in air-to-air combat. It's got a different profile than some of the other planes, but this is an aircraft which the United States is legally prohibited from selling to other countries. And there are only so many of them that the U.S. Air Force has in its arsenal. So this is very, very serious. Okay, from Eyal Yacobi, reposting a 9-second clip from Secretary of State Rubio. Breaking, this is yesterday, 7:10, breaking Secretary of State Marco Rubio on Iran. Iran refuses to talk about the ballistic missiles. That is a big problem. Okay, so we wait to see what came out of Geneva. But yeah, if Iran doesn't want to bend on that, then expect things to accelerate on the military option. Open source Intel Defender, yesterday, 8/22. Senior advisors to President Donald J. Trump would prefer Israel strike Iran before the United States launches a large-scale air campaign on the country, stating that the politics are a lot better if the Israelis go first and alone and the Iranians retaliate, claiming that Iranian retaliation would help muster support from American voters for a U.S. strike. Okay, and then they reference Politico. We don't know what's going to happen, but we know that the speculation meter is very high. The guessometer is also quite active. There are all kinds of different scenarios. Of course, last year in the 12-day war, Israel did go first, and it wasn't until some very heavy-duty conventional weapons were needed that the B-2s came in with Operation Midnight Hammer, conventional weapons that the Israelis, of course, didn't have. All right, to the American home front. This is from Jesse Waters, 4-minute, 41-second clip. This is yesterday, 8 o'clock. Breaking: Obama and Clinton operative Larry Summers has resigned from Harvard amid his ties to Epstein. That's not a huge surprise. We talked about that before. Bill Gates just confessed to flying on Epstein's plane and having 2 affairs with Russian women. And also, even the ex-Norwegian prime minister who handed Obama his Nobel Peace Prize is being investigated for taking gifts, travel, and loans from Epstein. So here are some people who, in some of the first rounds, I would say, are being affected by the Epstein files. Are there going to be more? I think it's pretty safe to say they are definitely going to be more. And indeed, regardless of who it is, our ultimate faith and trust is in the one God of the universe. It's not in these human beings. Okay, from Visegrad 24. This is from this morning at 4:01 a.m. And there's a 19-second clip. USS Gerald R. Ford leaves the U.S. naval base in Suda Bay on the Greek island of Crete after refueling and resupplying. So it is expected that the Gerald R. Ford is going to reach the Eastern Mediterranean near Israel sometime tomorrow. Now, some of you all are doubtless, you've heard things on social media about the Ford had some kind of a sewage problems with its 600 toilets. Last night, we made some inappropriate jokes about that behind the scenes. But regardless of what some of the issues are aboard the Ford, we do pray for the safety of our men and women serving in uniform, that not only are they kept safe in a potential combat situation, but also that whether it's their ship, the plane, whatever it is, everything is working mechanically according to design. So of course, the USS Gerald R. Ford is the most advanced, also the most expensive aircraft supercarrier ever built. And we may indeed see how it functions in a very significant combat situation in the not too distant future. With that in mind, our next story from Tusi TV, posted this morning at 8:18 a.m., February 26th. His thought: strike possible within 72 hours if talks fail. Now, of course, I don't have all the information of what took place in Geneva. As the report of what happened goes back to the president might say, you were successful, let's continue with this. The president could say, this is a disaster, this is a failure. And Tusi's conclusion: strikes possible within 72 hours could take place. We don't know. But one thing no one disputes: tension is building. Okay, so here's another one. This is Visegrad 24 this morning, 6:23 a.m. The president of the World Economic Forum, Borga Brenda, hope I pronounced that properly, just resigned after the forum launched an investigation into his relationship with Epstein. Okay, World Economic Forum. I know a lot of people don't like the World Economic Forum. They think it's something which accelerates globalism, the New World Order, and Yeah, here you have it. Another one down. Okay. From Maria Bartiromo on Fox Business this morning, 8:42 a.m. NATO shifts surveillance toward Iran amid fears of U.S.-led strike. Okay, that's the kind of news story. And mind you, you can go read the article for some specifics, but that's the kind of news story where you see the momentum is building toward a military conflict. Look, I hope that the Iranians are smart. I hope that they realize that, okay, it's over. We need to go flee the country and go into exile and turn the country over to the people who don't want the Islamic Republic in power anymore. I hope they're smart. I don't think they are smart. At the same time, we've got to let nature take its course with these negotiations and see what happens. Now, here's another post from Tusi. This is on his personal X feed. Reposting something from open source intel. A senior Iranian official told Al Jazeera, "We completely reject dismantling nuclear facilities, handing over uranium stockpiles, and the principle of zero enrichment forever." That was 5 hours ago. And here, Tusi's conclusion is, we're at the FUCK around stage. Soon we will get to find out. So you all know that expression, F around and find out. He says we're at the F around stage. Now you're soon going to find out. That's his opinion. All right. We know these things can change. It's my opinion that the military likelihood is building right now. That's where the momentum is. I could be wrong. We could be totally shocked and surprised. So here, Mark Levin, he posted something from open source intel 7 hours ago. And here you see Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff in Geneva. That's the Omani foreign minister, and goes through a number of U.S. demands to Iran in Geneva. Mark Levin's thought is, on what basis do we believe the Iranian regime will adhere to any agreement? There is absolutely none. Then the simple question is, do we destroy this enemy regime before it destroys us? There's absolutely no justification for exposing our country to such a death cult. That's Mark Levin. And his final statement is get Khamenei. So perhaps Mark Levin, like many others, they are expecting or anticipating something similar to what took place in Venezuela, where special forces were sent in and they grabbed Nicolas Maduro in the night. I am sure that the U.S. military knows exactly where Ayatollah Khamenei is. We'll see what happens. Now, this is something I saw this morning on Instagram. You all can go through this yourself. It's from the Jerusalem Post. The Post asked AI when the U.S. will strike Iran. So this is kind of interesting. I don't put a lot of faith in AI, but Jerusalem Post asked a number of these places, AI, and basically the window of possible activity is anywhere between now and March the 8th. But those of us who are looking and paying attention, yeah, we could have concluded that without AI. But hey, we'll just wait and see what happens. And a lot of this has to do with President Trump. I'll go back to the screen here. A lot of this has to go back to Trump gave Tehran 10 to 15 days to make a deal. So, yeah, we're not going to be waiting around for months on end before something could happen. We're just not. Okay, we got 4 more stories, and then we will conclude. From Benny Johnson, reposting a picture by Representative Lauren Boebert. The first image of Hillary Clinton testifying under oath about Jeffrey Epstein to the Republican Oversight Committee. Okay, this is the first time Hillary has had to answer real questions about Epstein. Clinton does not look happy. Yeah, that's a real surprise, isn't it? Okay, our next story. Now, this is Fox News today, 10:58 a.m. U.S. Navy 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain reduced to mission-critical staffing ahead of potential airstrikes, U.S. officials tell Fox News. Okay, so that's more the situation in the region. mission critical staffing. Here, Newsmax, Clinton, no information on Epstein's crimes, don't recall meeting him. A lot of people would say that's not true. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton told U.S. lawmakers in New York on Thursday that she had no knowledge of Jeffrey Epstein's or Ghislaine Maxwell's crimes, starting off 2 days of depositions that will also include former President Bill Clinton. Okay, so this is huge in that you have a former First Lady, former Secretary of State, and later a former president having to give depositions on this whole Epstein business. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I know that this is very, very upsetting. Just the whole Epstein thing, it just makes you really sick to your stomach. All right, and then the final story we've got, this is from the New York Post. It's actually from yesterday afternoon, so this would have been while we were going. Dozens of world's deadliest fighter jets arrive in Israel as Trump orders Iran to end nuclear program. So, and this focuses on the F-22 Raptor, and designed by Lockheed Martin. The F-22s cost around $350 million each and are so vital to the U.S. that the Pentagon has forbidden their sale or licensure to any foreign government. So, yeah, they perform a very vital role. And anyway, yeah, you all can read through this. And this means that more and more pieces are being put into place in the region, in the potential theater of combat. And so we've got to be praying for, yes, peace in the Middle East, Gaza, Iran, but especially for the believers. The Messianic Jewish community in Israel, of course, needs prayer. It's very small. It's also very tight-knit. The people are going to be on a knife's edge going into Purim, anticipating some kind of likely conflict. Likewise, there are many believers, many Christians in Iran, and they are eagerly praying for the despotic Islamic Republic to fall. And of course, here in the United States, many of us probably have friends, family members, acquaintances who are in the military right now. They don't know what's going to happen in the coming days or weeks. We also are watching the financial markets, how they could be affected by a potential conflict. 1/5 of all the world's oil and gas comes right out of the region, goes through the Strait of Hormuz, which the Iranians could easily close off. I mean, there are all these kinds of things which we've got to keep in prayer and consideration right now. So when I say that, when we finish this series on one law, one Torah theology, in the future, we're probably going to only mention the issue in piecemeal, because we've got issues which are much, much more important, 100 times, 1,000 times more important, which we've got to probably discuss this year. And, the one law, one Torah people, the people who stridently identify with that ideology, they need to go on their own way. You all deserve to know where I stand with this. I'm disfavorable to one law, one Torah theology. I also believe that there's some people in Messianic Judaism, as is demonstrated by this paper, who are moving the definition around because they ultimately think you're one law if you're not Jewish, and you have a favorable view of these things for one's growth in holiness and sanctification. And that's not fair, and that's not reasonable. But we've got a rapidly changing Middle Eastern and world situation where we're going to find out, perhaps this year, I don't know, but in the not too distant future, how ready is today's Messianic movement in truly being the end time move of God. So tomorrow, we're going to be discussing, as we close up the One Law, One Torah theology series, there has to be a better way. Okay, because just because one doesn't support one law, one Torah theology, because they think they've misapplied the passages and they've got a lot of legalism. I haven't told any of you, if you're not Jewish, to leave the Messianic community and stop doing what you're doing. I believe there's a better way, one that is more focused around growth in holiness, discipleship, sanctification, the work of the Holy Spirit, and in joining in the Messianic mission. And we'll be getting into that tomorrow. As always, on behalf of Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and support for all of our ministry efforts. Please do consider signing up for a monthly $25 or $50 donation. Be sure to visit my website, messianicapologetics.net, where you can access a wide array of articles, frequently asked questions entries, different back issues of Outreach Israel News, the monthly newsletter, back episodes of Messianic Insider, different McKee moment shorts, and generally you can take a look at our ministry adventures from over the years. Please give this episode a thumbs up or a heart. It will definitely help our exposure on social media, and repost it to your different social media feeds, Facebook, X, Instagram. Forward it on to your friends. We will see you again tomorrow with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you, shalom, and take care.